So we have here January 28th, 1863, a mass meeting in St. Louis. St. Louis declares support for the Emancipation Proclamation. A mass meeting in St. Louis, Missouri, January 28th, 1863. Well, that's good. So Missourians aren't just a bunch of piles of shit. That's great news. That Missourians aren't just a bunch of piles of shit. Isn't it? Isn't that great news? That Missourians aren't just a bunch of piles of shit. Let's just read a page from this Great Rebellion book. How much will you bid for this first class inward? $5, $5. At the end of 2 hours, the auctioneer had not received a bid above $8. Exasperated, defeated, he led 7 human chattels back to jail. St. Louis had held its last public slave auction. Wow. We just talked about St. Louis. So that's pretty good that St. Louis is going to... When is this? Okay, but the triumph was in no sense all on the side of the Union boys. A delegation from Alabama wasn't traveling through Missouri talking long and hard and seriously without the consent of Governor-elect Claiborne F. Jackson. Clabe was the strong-minded old rascal. He married in succession 3 daughters of Dr. Sappington, whose quinine pills were the standard frontier remedy for malaria. I reckon you'll be back next for the old woman, growled Sappington, getting to know the measure of Clabe. The governor-elect had led Missourians into Kansas during the bloody wars there in 55, and Clabe committed to slavery. Didn't intend to give up on that idea any more than on Dr. Sappington's females. If Clabe was left alone to rig the legislature, he intended to deliver Missouri to the Confederacy. Nor was Brigadier General Daniel M. Frost in charge of the militia any comfort to the Union men. He was hand in glove with Clabe. The worry, deep and real, was that Clabe would steal the government and frost the arsenal. Sometimes during Christmas week in St. Louis, the Union boys couldn't talk about anything but this danger. Those Germans who soon would fight Mit Segal didn't say too much, but their angry eyes said if secessionists tried it, blood would run in the streets of St. Louis. In time it did. In time, a lady informed Galusha Anderson that the first chance she got, she'd shoot Frank Blair. I have a revolver, she snapped when the minister chided her, and I am practicing with it every day in the backyard and have already become a good shot. The emotional conflict along the border was as intense and enduring as the revolt of the ancients. In South Carolina, an eminent Missourian of a latter generation realized this fact when he invited his mother to the White House and offered her the accommodations of the Lincoln Room. You tell Harry, this reconstructed rebel told President Truman's sister, if he puts me in the room with Lincoln's bed in it, I'll sleep on the floor. Yet for others in 1860, the issue was not so easily resolved. The most articulate Missourian that the Civil War generation would produce, Sam Clemens, felt the tug of divided loyalty in his own heart. As his biographer Payne points out, when in December South Carolina seceded, Samuel Clemens felt strong for the Union, but later decided, like Lee, that he would go with his state. That part of it Clabe Jackson influenced and lead battalions to victory. In the private history of a campaign that failed, Samuel Clemens recalled his personal dilemma. Out west, there was a good deal of confusion in men's minds during the first months of the Great Trouble. Sam Clemens is Mark Twain, Huckleberry Finn. A good deal of unsettledness, of leaning first this way, then that, then the other way. It was hard for us to get our bearings. I call to mind an instance of this. I was piloting on the Mississippi when the news came that South Carolina had gone out of the Union on December 20th, 1860. My pilot mate was a New Yorker. He was strong for the Union, so was I. But he would not listen to me with any patience. My loyalty was smirched to his eye because my father had owned slaves. I said, in palliation of this dark fact that I had heard my father say some years before he died, that slavery was a great wrong, and that he would free the solitary Negro he then owned, if he could think it right to give away the property of the family when he was so straitened in means. My mate retorted that a mere impulse was nothing. Anybody could pretend a good impulse and went on decrying my unionism and libeling my ancestry. A month later, the secession atmosphere had considerably thickened on the lower Mississippi, and I became a rebel. And so did he. We were together in New Orleans the 26th of January when Louisiana went out of the Union. He did his full share of the rebel shouting, but was bitterly opposed to letting me do mine. He said that I came of bad stock of a father who had been willing to set slaves free. In the following summer, he was piloting a federal gunboat and shouting for the Union again, and I was in the Confederate Army. I held his note for some borrowed money. He was one of the most upright men I ever knew, but he repudiated that note without hesitation because I was a rebel and the son of a man who owned slaves. Samuel Clemens' war experiences reached their bitterest moments when he developed a boil and spent days sitting on a pile of hay in a horse trough. A few evenings later, one of the boys who shared a hayloft with him turned out to be a careless smoker. Sam Clemens, aroused to the scream of fire, sprained his ankle leaping down and decided right then that he was heading north to see his brother Orion in Iowa, a Union man and an infernal abolitionist to boot. All his life, Sam dreamed of making Joan of Arc his purest, greatest character, but it was out of his Missouri boyhood. As Dixon Wechter has observed, that Sam drew his noblest creation. His Joan of Arc turns to plaster saint, but inward Jim is as vital and earthbound as one of the lofty hickories that towered over the old farmstead with its slave quarters where Sam spent his summers. Inward Jim belongs to Sam's mature years when the son of the border berated King Leopold's brutalities in the Congo. Fuck Leopold, Belgium, motherfuckers, to the Sam, who spent a fortune publishing and promoting the book of one of his heroes, personal memoirs of U.S. Grant. But in 1860, piloting his steamboat upriver from New Orleans, Sam Clemens was still the son of the border. Confused and perplexed, a single trip carried him deep into the origins of the greater confusion and perplexity that comprised the troubled American conscience. When he sailed by Vicksburg, Mississippi, a city unsuspecting of the terrible doom that would befall it in less than 3 years, he was in the Black Belt, of which South Carolina was the germinal center, Calhoun the prophet, Jefferson Davis the heir. Further north, passing Memphis, he reached another south and older south for Tennessee and Kentucky, were the intellectual heirs of Virginia, with Jefferson the prophet and Jackson and Lincoln the distinguished political offspring. Next came St. Louis in Missouri, the fretful border, mixing north in the two souths and extending beyond Cairo into the part of southern Illinois called Egypt, where Stephen A. Douglas riding two horses was the political marvel for so long. In Washington, one last great effort at compromise remained to be made from the old South, Andrew Johnson of Tennessee and John Crittenden of Kentucky. Hell yeah! John Crittenden of Kentucky's a badass. Andrew Johnson of Tennessee is a bitch. With their stepchild Douglas of Illinois would come the militant leadership of that effort at compromise. Here the illusions of individuality that divided New England in the South, the Northwest, and the border states again locked in battle. John Crittenden pushed for compromise to stop secession. He was a senator from Kentucky. Northwest and the border states again locked in battle, yet there was a difference now. It was not to any section that any compromise must be sold, but to Mr. Lincoln in Springfield. None of this Sam Clemens knew, steering by the China trees around a river bend. All right, Earl